I've gone back and forth on whether to even tell this, because every time I start putting it into words, I get that same tight feeling in my chest, like I'm about to remember something I'm not supposed to. This isn't a campfire story, and it's not something I read online or heard from a friend of a friend. This happened to me, and for a long time, I tried to convince myself it didn't. The problem is, there are details I can't explain away, and no matter how much time passes, those details stay exactly the same. This took place in the fall of 2018, when I was 27 and living in a small rental house outside of a rural town in northern Arizona. I worked maintenance for a solar farm, which meant long drives through empty desert roads, usually before sunrise or after dark. I liked the job because it paid decently, and because I didn't have to deal with many people. I've always been skeptical by nature. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't jump to supernatural explanations. And until that year, I didn't believe in UFOs beyond the vague idea that something might exist somewhere out there in the universe. What happened changed that, not because it proved aliens are real in some grand cosmic way, but because something interacted with me directly in a way that felt intentional. On the night it started, I was driving home after a late shift. It was just after midnight, and the desert was completely quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own tires on the asphalt, even with the radio on low. About 20 minutes from town, I noticed a light in the sky to my left. At first, I assumed it was a plane. There's a small regional airport about an hour away, and aircraft are pretty common. But this light wasn't moving the way planes do. It was hovering, perfectly still, just above the distant hills. It was bright white, not blinking, not red or green, and it looked too low to be a star. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds, then it moved. Not gradually, not smoothly. It shot straight up, stopped instantly, then slid sideways at an angle that didn't make sense. No arc, no curve, just point A to point B like it was being dragged on a screen. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell?" even though I was alone. My first instinct was to pull over and film it, but before I could even slow down, the light vanished. It didn't fade. It didn't zip away. It was just gone, like someone flipped a switch. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, replaying it in my head and trying to come up with a rational explanation. Drone? Military test? Optical illusion? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had mostly convinced myself it was nothing. That night, I slept poorly, waking up multiple times for no clear reason. Over the next few days, strange little things started happening. Nothing dramatic, just off. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. I'd misplace objects I knew I'd left in specific spots. My phone battery would drain unusually fast, even when I wasn't using it. I didn't connect these things at first. I was stressed, working long hours, and the desert heat was still lingering even in October. A week later, I saw the light again. This time, I was outside. I'd stepped into my backyard around 11 p.m. to take out the trash. The sky was clear, and the stars were sharp and bright. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed the same white light directly overhead. I froze. It wasn't high up like a plane. It was low enough that I could tell it wasn't massive, maybe the size of a small car, though it's hard to judge scale against the sky. It made no sound, none at all. No hum, no wind displacement, nothing. Just a silent, hovering presence. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, staring straight up, my neck starting to ache. Then my porch light flickered, once, twice. The light above me responded by dimming slightly, like it noticed. That's when panic set in. I ran inside, slammed the door, and locked it, feeling ridiculous even as I did it. From inside, I killed the lights and looked out through a gap in the curtains. The object stayed there for another 30 seconds, then moved away, slowly this time, gliding toward the horizon until it blended into the stars. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I found something that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. In the dirt near where I'd been standing, there were 3 shallow impressions, arranged in a triangular pattern. They weren't deep, like footprints, more like something heavy had pressed down evenly. The soil around them was dry, but inside the impressions, the dirt was darker, almost damp. I took pictures, then went to work, showing them to a coworker. He laughed it off and said it was probably animal tracks or something from my trash cans. I wanted to believe him. The encounters escalated after that. I started losing time. Not hours, but chunks of minutes I couldn't account for. I'd be driving and suddenly realize I was farther down the road than I remembered, with no recollection of the last turn or stoplight. Once, I found a small burn mark on my left forearm, perfectly circular, about the size of a dime. It didn't hurt, and it didn't look like a normal burn. It was just there. When I tried to think about how it happened, my head would start to ache, like I was pushing against something. The worst incident happened in early November. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a low vibration, not a sound exactly, more like pressure in the air. My bedroom was lit by a soft white glow coming through the window. I couldn't move. I wasn't asleep. I know the difference. I could see my room clearly, the dresser, the door, the pile of clothes on the chair. The light intensified, and I felt weightless, like the bed wasn't supporting me anymore. That's when I saw them. Not little green men, not monsters. Tall shapes, thin, indistinct, like silhouettes made of shadow and light. They stood at the foot of my bed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being examined, not physically, but mentally. Images flashed in my mind, my childhood home, my mother's face, the desert road, the light in the sky. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even open my mouth. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to my alarm, sunlight streaming through the window. I was fully dressed in the clothes I'd worn the day before. My bed was perfectly made. I called in sick that day and sat on my couch, shaking, trying to process what had happened. Over the following weeks, the activity stopped as suddenly as it started. No more lights, no more missing time, no more marks. I eventually moved out of that house and took a job in another state. I don't talk about this in real life. When I do, people either joke or give me that polite smile that says they don't believe me. I don't blame them. If someone else told me this story, I'd probably react the same way. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. Last month, nearly 7 years later, I was driving home from work in my new town. Different state, different desert, different life. As I pulled into my driveway, my porch light flickered. Once, twice. I looked up, and for just a second, I saw a bright white light hovering above the hills in the distance. It didn't stay long. It didn't need to. The message was clear. Whatever happened back then wasn't random, and it wasn't over. I'm not telling this because I want attention or because I think it makes me special. I'm telling it because I've reached a point where keeping it to myself feels worse than being judged for it. For years, I've tried to label what happened as stress, sleep deprivation, or some kind of psychological break. But no matter how I frame it, there are parts of this that don't fit any explanation I'm comfortable with. This happened in the summer of 2015, when I was 19, living with my parents in a small town in western Pennsylvania. I was home from college, working nights at a 24-hour grocery store just off a state highway. The job sucked, but it paid. And I liked the quiet drive home after my shift ended at 2 a.m. The road cut through long stretches of farmland and forest, with maybe one car passing every 10 minutes. That night started like any other. It was late July, humid, windows down, radio barely audible. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed my reception died completely. The radio cut to static, then silence. My phone lost signal at the same time. That wasn't unusual in some areas, but what caught my attention was how suddenly it happened, like I'd crossed an invisible line. A few seconds later, my headlights dimmed slightly, then returned to normal. I remember tapping the dashboard and muttering something about my car being a piece of junk. That's when the light appeared. It came from ahead of me, cresting over the tree line on the right side of the road. It was a dull orange at first, almost like a flare, but it moved too smoothly. It rose straight up, stopped, then drifted toward the center of the sky. I slowed down instinctively, my foot easing off the gas. The light brightened as it moved, shifting from orange to a pale yellow, then to an intense white. I pulled over near a gravel turnout, heart pounding harder than it should have for something I kept telling myself was probably a helicopter. As soon as I stopped, the light stopped too. It hovered there, completely still. No blinking, no sound. The air felt thick, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. I sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide whether to get out and look or just drive away. I never got the chance to choose. My engine died, the dashboard lights went out, plunging the car into darkness. At the same moment, the white light intensified, flooding the interior through the windshield. I felt a pressure in my ears, like when you're underwater, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Not fear exactly, something colder. Like I'd made a mistake just by being there. I don't remember leaving the car. That's the part that still messes with me the most. The next clear memory I have is standing in the field beside the road, barefoot. The grass was cold and wet, even though it hadn't rained. The light was above me now, closer than before, and I could finally see it wasn't just a point. It was a shape. Disc-like, but not perfectly round, with subtle angles that hurt to focus on. The surface wasn't metal, at least not in any way I recognize. It looked smooth, but light didn't reflect off it properly. It bent, like the object wasn't fully solid. I couldn't hear anything, but I could feel a vibration deep in my chest, like my heartbeat wasn't entirely my own anymore. I tried to move, to run back to my car, but my body didn't respond the way it should have. My legs felt distant, heavy, like I was controlling them through water. That's when I noticed the ground beneath me. The grass was flattened in a wide circle, pressed down evenly, as if something heavy had settled there recently. I became aware of a presence then. Not shapes or figures, but attention. I had the distinct feeling that something was aware of me, not just seeing me, but reading me. Thoughts started surfacing that weren't mine. Images flashed through my head without context. A room with smooth walls and no corners. A soundless hum. A sense of distance so vast it made my stomach turn. I wanted it to stop. I remember thinking, very clearly, I don't want this. Immediately, the pressure increased. The light pulsed, and the world seemed to tilt. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car. The engine was running. The headlights were on. Dawn light was creeping over the horizon. My phone buzzed with a flood of notifications as signal returned. I checked the time. It was 6:47 a.m. Nearly 4 hours had passed. I drove home in a daze, my hand shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. When I finally got inside, my parents were already awake, getting ready for work. They asked why I was home so late. I lied. I said my car broke down. I didn't know how to tell the truth without sounding insane. Over the next few days, I realized things were wrong with me. I had intense headaches that came and went without warning. I struggled to concentrate, losing my train of thought mid-sentence. At night, I dreamed of that light, of standing under it, unable to look away. A week later, I found a mark on my upper back while getting dressed. It was a series of small, symmetrical impressions, arranged in a line along my spine. They weren't bruises, they didn't hurt. They faded after a few days, but the memory of them didn't. I eventually worked up the courage to go back to that stretch of road in daylight. I found the turnout easily. In the field beside it, the grass had grown back unevenly, but the soil underneath was compacted in a perfect circle. I didn't stay long. I transferred schools that fall and moved out of state the next year. I tried to put it behind me, to live like it never happened. For a while that worked. Then, last year, something small but terrifying happened. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt that same pressure in my ears. My room filled with a soft white glow, not bright enough to hurt, but impossible to ignore. I didn't see any shapes this time. I didn't need to. I felt that attention again, probing, familiar, and inside my head, clear as if someone had spoken it out loud, was a single thought that wasn't mine. "You remember?" The light faded, the pressure lifted. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't know what they want. I don't know why it happened to me. All I know is that whatever took an interest in me back then hasn't forgotten, and I don't think it ever will. I've never reported this to anyone official, and I probably never will. Not because I'm afraid of getting in trouble, but because I know exactly how it would sound. I can already imagine the polite nods, the paperwork, the quiet decision that I'm either exaggerating or unstable. So instead, I'm putting it here, exactly as it happened to me. This took place in late winter of 2020, right before everything in the world started shutting down. I was 32 years old, recently divorced and living alone in a rented duplex outside a small town in eastern Oregon. I worked as a night dispatcher for a private security company, which meant my sleep schedule was permanently broken. Most nights, I'd get home around 4 a.m., make something quick to eat, and stay up until sunrise before crashing. I liked the hours because the world felt honest at night. Fewer people, less noise, less pretending. On the morning this started, I was driving home on a long, empty stretch of highway that cut through open land and low hills. Snow still lined the shoulders of the road, dirty and half melted. The sky was clear, stars sharp enough to look fake. About 10 minutes from my place, my headlights briefly flickered. I didn't think much of it. The car was old, but then my dashboard clock reset itself. It went from 4:18 a.m. to 1200, flashing like I'd just disconnected the battery. A second later, the radio shut off. The engine was still running fine, so I kept driving, annoyed more than concerned. That's when the sky changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The stars ahead of me didn't disappear, but they looked wrong, slightly smeared, like someone had dragged a finger across wet paint. Then a shape emerged from that distortion, not flying into view, not descending. It was just suddenly there, a dark oval against the sky, outlined by a faint white glow. It was massive, far bigger than anything I'd seen in the air before, and it was moving parallel to the road, matching my speed exactly. I slowed down. It slowed down. I sped up. It stayed with me. There was no sound, no wind, just the low hum of my tires and my own breathing, which had gone shallow without me realizing it. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands started to ache. I kept telling myself it was a blimp, or some experimental aircraft, anything normal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. After about a mile, the object drifted closer to the road, lowering itself until it was just above the hills. The glow intensified, and for a brief moment, the inside of my car was lit up like it was daytime. My phone, which had been sitting in the cup holder, vibrated violently, then went black. The engine cut out. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of the highway. I tried the ignition. Nothing. That's when the fear really hit. Not panic, not adrenaline. Something heavier, like the realization that I wasn't in control anymore. The light outside grew brighter, and the air inside the car felt thick, hard to breathe. My ears started ringing, a high-pitched tone that drowned out every other sound. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember unbuckling my seatbelt. The next thing I recall clearly is standing on the road, staring up. The object was directly above me now, so close that it filled most of my vision. The surface wasn't smooth or metallic like you'd expect. It looked layered, almost organic, like overlapping plates shifting slowly against each other. Patterns moved across it, faint lines of light tracing paths that didn't repeat. I was aware of my body, but it felt distant, like I was watching myself from a few feet behind my own eyes. I couldn't look away. A pressure built behind my eyes, and images began flooding my mind. Not memories, places I'd never seen. Vast, dark spaces. Points of light arranged in unfamiliar patterns. A sensation of falling without moving. I became aware that something was being taken from me, though I couldn't say what. Information, maybe. Reactions. Fear. I felt exposed in a way I don't have words for, like every private thought I'd ever had was laid out and examined. I wanted to resist, but the idea didn't even feel like it belonged to me. It was like my will had been turned down to almost nothing. Then there was a sudden shift. The pressure eased slightly, and with it came a sharp, intrusive thought that wasn't mine. Observe response. Immediately, my heart started racing. My breathing became erratic. I dropped to my knees on the cold asphalt, gasping. I realized then that the fear I felt wasn't entirely natural. It was being amplified, pushed, like a stimulus in an experiment. As soon as that realization formed, the sensation changed again. The fear receded, replaced by something closer to indifference. I don't know how long this lasted. Time didn't feel linear. Eventually, the light dimmed. The object rose silently, backing away without turning, until it merged with the distorted stars and vanished. I found myself alone on the road, the night suddenly normal and unbearably quiet. My car engine started on its own. The radio came back to life, mid-song. The clock read 4:19 a.m., as if only a minute had passed. I drove home in shock, my body moving on autopilot. When I got inside, I noticed frost melting off my jacket even though I hadn't felt cold. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch until sunrise, replaying everything over and over, trying to find a flaw, a gap, something that proved it wasn't real. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes in myself. Subtle at first. I'd anticipate things before they happened. Not in a psychic way, just small moments. Like knowing a call would come in seconds before the phone rang. My dreams became vivid and unsettling, filled with abstract imagery and that same sense of being watched. I also developed an intense sensitivity to light. Bright rooms made my head ache. Fluorescent lights felt almost painful. I went to a doctor, then another. Blood tests came back normal. Sleep studies showed nothing unusual. I stopped bringing it up after the third appointment ended with a suggestion to manage stress better. The final incident happened 3 months later. I was at work, sitting alone in the dispatch office during a slow shift. Around 2 a.m., the overhead lights flickered. My computer screen warped slightly, like the image was being pulled sideways. That pressure returned, faint but unmistakable. For just a second, the room felt bigger on the inside, stretched. And in my mind, clear and emotionless, came another thought that wasn't mine. Data sufficient. Everything snapped back to normal. The lights stabilized, the pressure vanished. I sat there for a long time, hands trembling, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Whatever that was, whatever did this, it never announced itself as hostile or benevolent. I don't think those concepts apply. I think I was observed, tested, and cataloged the way we do with animals we don't fully understand. I quit my job not long after and moved to a city, hoping crowds and light would make me feel safer. Sometimes, late at night, when the sky is clear and I let myself look up, I get that same uneasy feeling, like something far away knows exactly where I am, and worse, like it already got what it came for. I don't know if this counts as an encounter, an abduction, or just the worst night of my life, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever happened to me wasn't a dream, and it wasn't something my mind invented. I've replayed it too many times, from too many angles, trying to find the point where reality breaks. It never does. This happened in 2012, when I was 24 years old and living in a small coastal town in Maine. I was working seasonal construction, bouncing between short-term jobs, and staying in a rundown trailer I rented from a guy who barely asked questions as long as the cash was on time. The place was isolated, backed up against miles of forest, with the ocean a few minutes down the road. Nights out there were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the world had turned its volume all the way down. I wasn't new to that kind of silence, and it never bothered me before. After this, I can't stand it. The night it started, I couldn't sleep. No reason, no anxiety, no bad news. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of an old wall clock. Around 1:30 a.m., I noticed the ticking stopped. I remember thinking the battery must have died, but then I realized something else was wrong. The forest sounds outside were gone too. No insects, no wind in the trees. It felt like someone had pressed pause on everything except me. I sat up in bed, suddenly alert, and that's when the light came through the window. It wasn't bright at first, more like a pale glow, the kind you'd expect from a full moon. But the moon wasn't out that night. I got up and looked through the blinds, expecting maybe headlights on the dirt road. What I saw didn't make sense. Hovering just above the tree line was a large, dimly glowing shape, not shining, not casting beams, just existing there, softly illuminating the tops of the trees beneath it. It was hard to focus on, like my eyes kept sliding off its outline. The longer I stared, the more uneasy I felt, like my brain was rejecting what it was seeing. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone. No signal, not even the emergency indicator. The screen flickered, then shut off completely. That's when I heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even really a noise. More like a vibration, low and steady, that I felt in my teeth and behind my eyes. The trailer started to shake gently, not enough to knock anything over, but enough to make the cabinets rattle. I panicked. I won't pretend I stayed calm or tried to reason through it. I grabbed my keys and ran for the door, fully intending to get in my truck and drive until something familiar appeared. I made it 3 steps outside before my legs gave out. The moment my feet hit the dirt, the vibration intensified and a pressure settled over me, pinning me in place. I wasn't paralyzed exactly. I could move, but every movement felt delayed, like my body was responding seconds after I told it to. I looked up, and the object was closer now, much closer. It wasn't above the trees anymore, it was directly overhead. In the dim light, I could finally make out its shape. It wasn't a classic saucer. It was elongated, asymmetrical, with surfaces that shifted subtly, like they were breathing. Parts of it seemed solid, while others looked almost translucent. The glow wasn't coming from a single source. It was everywhere, embedded in the structure itself. I became acutely aware of being watched, not from one direction, but from all of it. As if the object itself was aware, thoughts started pushing into my mind that weren't mine. Not voices, not words, concepts, sensations, curiosity, assessment. I felt stripped down in a way I can't describe, like every memory, every fear, every weakness was being laid out and examined. I tried to scream, but my throat wouldn't cooperate. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt, and suddenly I wasn't outside anymore. I didn't feel like I was lifted or pulled. One second, I was standing in the dirt. The next, I was somewhere else. The air was different, heavy but clean. There were no walls that I could see, but I knew I was enclosed. The light was uniform, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I couldn't see my surroundings clearly, not because it was dark, but because my vision couldn't find edges to latch onto. I became aware of figures then, tall, thin shapes standing at a distance I couldn't judge. They didn't approach me. They didn't need to. The sense of attention intensified, and with it came images. The forest, the ocean, the trailer, then things I didn't recognize. Vast structures, patterns in the sky that weren't stars. A sense of movement across distances so large they made me feel insignificant. I felt fear surge, sharp and overwhelming, and immediately it changed. Flattened, controlled, like someone adjusted a dial. I realized then that my emotional responses weren't entirely my own. They were being monitored, tested, manipulated. I felt something touch my arm, though I couldn't see what it was. A sharp sensation, followed by numbness. Images of my body flashed in my mind, not as I see myself, but as data, systems, signals. I wanted it to stop. I focused on that thought, pushing it as hard as I could. For a brief moment, everything seemed to hesitate. The figures shifted slightly, their outlines blurring. There was a flicker of something I can only describe as surprise. Then everything went dark. I woke up on the floor of my trailer, just inside the open door. Morning light streamed in, harsh and ordinary. Birds were chirping like nothing had happened. My head was pounding, and my entire body felt sore, like I'd run a marathon. I checked the time. It was nearly 9 a.m. I had no memory of the hours in between. My phone was on the floor beside me, cracked down the middle. When I tried to turn it on, it stayed dead. I noticed marks on my arm where I'd felt that touch. Small, precise impressions in a straight line, already fading. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I spent the entire morning sitting on my bed, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself I'd had some kind of breakdown. Over the next few months, things changed. I became hyper-aware of patterns. Lights in the sky caught my attention in a way they never had before. I started having vivid dreams of being in that place again, of floating in that endless light while something observed me. Sometimes I'd wake up with the same numbness in my arm. Sometimes I'd wake up standing, not lying down, with no memory of getting out of bed. I moved out of that trailer as soon as my lease ended. I left the state entirely not long after. I told myself distance would help, that whatever happened was tied to that place. I was wrong. A few weeks ago, more than a decade later, I was walking my dog late at night in a completely different part of the country. Suburban neighborhood, streetlights, houses close together, as normal as it gets. I looked up out of habit, scanning the sky. For a split second, the stars looked smeared, just like they had that night. The feeling hit me immediately, that pressure behind the eyes, that sense of being noticed. I didn't see the object. I didn't need to. My dog froze, ears flat, refusing to move. Then it passed. The sky returned to normal. The feeling faded, but the message was unmistakable. Whatever took me that night knows exactly who I am, and it knows where to find me.